Okay, so next week I sort of copied the same part of the top. Anyway, creme. Next week, great presentation. You'll love it. It's for a great cause. And I said it was a double whammy. And not only is this a fantastic presentation, but next week sees the return. Sees the return. She's trying to hide there. Of Kat Miller. Kat Miller will be taking on for at least one Sunday. Is that right, Kat?
Yes.
At least one Sunday. So a double whammy, two things to look forward to. Hi there. So don't miss it. Put your name down, get signed up. Okay, this week's presentation. We're very lucky to have Ilona de Borhegyi. Close enough. Living with the Vatican. Now, working for the United Nations in Rome, in Italy for 30 years, included living through many historical highlights of Vatican influence on Italian culture and international politics. Ilona will recount her stories of the Vatican and the Pope. Ilona is a retired information officer for the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and still maintains a home in Rome. She began visiting Lakeside in 1998 and has been an active member of the community ever since 2014. So please give a very, very warm and safely distant welcome to Ilona de Borhegyi.
Can I get a red light here? Yes. Okay, I should start with a Pope joke too, right? Okay, actually I'll put one in at the end. I want to make sure that my timing is good on this. There's a lot of material. I'm going to try to liven it up as much as I can with some good jokes. When you live with a monarchy and then you feel like, it was my first experience with that. So at any rate, to start off with my background, this were 30 years that I would have never imagined in my life that were just traumatic for the world. I'm half Hungarian, and I always wanted to work in Europe. And my US government job didn't challenge me enough. So in 1983, I began applying for jobs overseas. I landed interviews at 2 UN agencies in Vienna and in Rome. And in between, I visited Hungary for the first time to meet my Hungarian relatives who live in Transylvania, which is in Romania, but we don't like to, we always say Transylvania. And everyone I met told horror stories about living through World War II and under communism, but they were very hopeful that their Polish Pope, John Paul II, who I will refer to as just John Paul, would liberate Eastern Europe from the Soviet Union. Their hope, compared to what I had heard growing up, made me think, could a pope really have so much power? I'm lucky to say I made it to Europe and lived through 3 amazing decades of history there. And I also know there's a couple of Europeans at least here. Are there any Italians? Fantastico, veramente. Dopodiché ci parliamo in italiano. Okay. So what was it that brought about that change where Pope John Paul became a catalyst behind the fall of communism? Well, first to begin with, I moved in January 1985 to Rome to work at the headquarters of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization as a visual media officer. And I looked for months for the perfect apartment and finally found a 17th century villa in Rome's medieval district Trastevere with just a 5-minute walk to St. Peter's. I thought how convenient this would be for all of my future visitors. I was just thinking as a tourist. And then I thought, well, I just settled into life. I learned Italian in 6 months because I grew up speaking Spanish. My parents were archaeologists in Guatemala. And so I found that it was very easy to integrate, and I made a lot of friends right away with my Italian neighbors and also colleagues. I learned my street was over 500 years old and had been built as the connecting road for pilgrims to travel from inside the walls of Rome to St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope was a major part of the news every day, which surprised me. This is all You learn all sorts of things when you change countries and find out what their priorities are. And he was on the news, especially on the government TV channels, and the Holy See spoke at all of our international meetings. The Pope's white helicopter flew regularly over my apartment, and his motorcades would cause horrendous traffic jams. Millions of tourists came to visit the Vatican and wait hours for the Pope to speak. In 2000, which was the holy year, 40 million tourists came, and I was just telling a friend of mine that all the shops near the Vatican pulled out their toilets because everybody was stopping for toilets. They said, "Oh, come on in, no toilet, no toilet." So go find one somewhere else. It was quite an experience with 40 million people walking around, in addition to the 4 million who live in Rome. And so at any rate, going back to that, my mother was really kind of upset, though, because my telephone number wasn't in Rome. It was in the Vatican zone. So she had to pay 19 cents a minute to speak to me, where everybody else was paying only 5 cents. And she said, "Can't you get a party line with the Pope?" You know? So I said, "Well, let me try." At any rate, almost immediately, I had the opportunity to take part in a special pageantry of the Vatican. 1985 was the 40th anniversary of our agency, and the Pope held a special mass for all the staff and visiting dignitaries inside St. Peter's. It was one of the most awesome experiences. It was amazing. I then began to participate in the collapse of communism at work. My Eastern European colleagues would listen secretly to radios in their offices and whisper stories about revolutionary rumblings in their countries and how this Polish Pope was going to change their future. Each trip I took to see my Hungarian relatives and friends became more meaningful. I have to just move this so I can see it a little bit better, excuse me. Okay, here, that works. Okay. When I would go back to visit my Hungarian relatives, I would smuggle food and barter items into Romania using my UN passport as protection, which was not absolutely kosher at all, but it worked. And I bought food for my family on the black market. I stood in lines to buy potatoes and bread and bought contraband beer from the gypsies. The revolutions became a unique moment of solidarity among the ethnic groups. In Romania, the gypsies sided with the Hungarians against the Ceausescu government. One of my UN colleagues who saw my US passport with so many red star stamps insisted I must be a spy. It was actually quite dangerous, but it was also very exhilarating. I mean, I was traveling, and it was a 12-hour trip. They'd stop us for 4 hours at the border with these big, giant Russian guards that would come on board and check my passports, and they'd look at the UN passport and go, "Oh, okay, okay." So, meanwhile, the Italians kept wondering what this foreign pope would do next and why, because he was so totally different and unpredictable. When Karol Wojtyla was elected in 1978 as the first ever Polish pope, he was also the first non-Italian in 450 years. His election was a surprise worldwide, especially because John Paul spoke his mind, and he was opposed to both fascism and communism. In 1979, despite warnings from Brezhnev, John Paul visited Poland, resulting in what is said to be the trigger that led to the end of communism and the 1980 rise of the trade union Solidarity under Lech Walesa. When John Paul was shot at St. Peter's in 1981, some say it was an assassination revenge attack by the Soviet Union, but that has not been proved. Think what you will. Then eventually came the revolution of 1989, which began in Poland and continued in Hungary, East Germany, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. And the Berlin Wall fell on 9 November. My Eastern European colleagues cheered, returning to their childhood nationalities again. I'm working for the UN. People were in the corridors. It was just such an experience. In his 26 years as Pope, John Paul was one of the most traveled world leaders in history. He visited 129 countries, beatified 1,340 people, and canonized 483 saints, more than the combined total of his predecessors over 5 centuries. I went to several of these ceremonies at St. Peter's, all jam-packed. I mean, I wasn't going to miss these. These were just, it was history. I felt so honored to be able to participate in these things. John Paul was the first pontiff to denounce mafia violence. In revenge, the mafia bombed 2 important churches in Rome, one of which I had just been to for a wedding. People were afraid to go to church for a long time after that. All through the 90s, there were attacks on judges, and when you're living with that, you begin to realize what the impact of the mafia is in Italy and, of course, worldwide, in the U.S. as well. So John Paul, what is the Vatican and how does it operate? The Holy See is the supreme government body of the Catholic Church and operates from Vatican City, which is a sovereign independent territory. The Pope is the ruler of both the Holy See and the Vatican City. It's one of the last remaining 7 absolute monarchies in the world, along with Saudi Arabia, Swaziland, which now has a new name, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Brunei, and Oman. The Holy See's income comes from real estate, particularly land and churches, and donations from individuals and dioceses. In contrast, the Vatican City has its own budget and income, mainly from museum fees and souvenirs. It is the smallest country in the world, mainly consisting of St. Peter's and the Vatican Museums and Library. The Vatican Bank was founded in 1942 by Pope Pius XII and has been the center of numerous scandals and accusations of mismanagement, money laundering, and fraud. Several books are out if you're interested to read more. And in 2018, its assets were valued at about 5.6 billion, but it's more likely to be 10 to 15 billion, and it pays no taxes. So the Italians call it the biggest tax evader in Italy. These scandals prompted Pope Francis to institute reforms to provide financial accountability and transparency, and that is an ongoing thing that is actually making progress. So why doesn't the Vatican pay taxes? When the Kingdom of Italy was established in 1871, there was considerable hostility between Italy and the Roman Catholic Church over the status of the papacy. This was finally resolved by the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which was signed by Benito Mussolini of Italy. This treaty recognized the Vatican City as an independent state under the sovereignty of the Holy See. Italy also agreed to give the Church financial compensation for the loss of its papal states and gave full independence to the Pope. Article 34 also declared there could be no divorce until this was overruled in 1974. Most importantly, all properties belonging to the Vatican were exempted from Italian taxes. When Mussolini took over Italy in 1925, he made many concessions to the church to keep his power, including having to marry his mistress and baptize his kids. Small concessions. So I'll go back to taxes in a minute. My most memorable Vatican moment was John Paul's funeral in 2005, at which time this was the single largest gathering in history of heads of state outside the United Nations. There were some 4 million of us squeezed together for hours, watching everything on giant screens as the seagulls floated above us. It was a read-through. Afterwards, people grouped together waving their country flags. It was the most peaceful global gathering I've ever seen. Then followed the daily watch for the white smoke from St. Peter's. It was yet another shock to Italy when a second foreigner, Joseph Alois Ratzinger, was elected Pope Benedict XVI, the oldest ever pope at 78 years old. It stirred an old rivalry, and some Italians at work teased German colleagues that there would be a comeback. And sure enough, Italy won the 2006 World Cup over Germany, 2-0. Now, I'm exaggerating a bit, but it really was quite a special year for the Germany-Italian World Cup. Then followed Benedict was quite a fashion horse and reintroduced several papal garments which had fallen into disuse, including the red hat and the red papal shoes, which, contrary to gossip, are not made by Prada, but by the Pope's personal shoemaker. And near the Pantheon is a street full of church fashion shops, including the Gamarelli tailors who have dressed the Pope since 1798. And if you're there, it's really fun to walk down the street and see all the latest cardinal guards, priests. As you've heard, there were several continuing and new controversies during Benedict's papacy. One example is criticism from the European governments, international organizations, and scientists when he said distributing condoms was not the answer to Africa's AIDS problem and could make it worse. And this is still a continuing controversy, the usage of condoms. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi was plagued by scandals. I don't know if you ever followed any of Berlusconi, 4 times Prime Minister, with his bunga bunga scandals and such. At any rate, they decided there better be a switch here at this point. So in 2011, a technocrat, Mario Monti, was made Prime Minister during the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis. He promptly upset normalcy with his extreme moves to tighten spending and collect taxes from everyone, including the church. His government claimed that the austerity move was a Save Italy package and not a Save the Church package. In December 2012, Monti won European Union approval to strip the Catholic Church of its exemption from local taxes on its real estate used for commercial purposes. In January 2013, Italy's central bank suspended credit card payments and cash withdrawals in Vatican City, reportedly because the Vatican didn't comply with international money laundering rules. However, in April 2013, Italian voters, fed up with the new and higher taxes, rejected his severe policies and voted in a new prime minister. And everything else went with it. No more further investigation on taxes for the church. Meanwhile, Pope Benedict quietly decided to abdicate on February 28, 2013, the same day I retired. Talk about papal privileges. I had to give 3 months' notice, and he only gave 3 weeks' notice. My mom asked me, so where's the party going to be? At your home or at St. Peter's? It was a shock to everyone, as Benedict was the first pope to resign in 600 years. So folks again watched it for the white smoke. And yet again, Italy was really upset when a third foreign pope was elected. But they quickly reconciled themselves that Jorge Mario Bergoglio was one of their own. He was an Italian because he was the son of Italian immigrants to Argentina. So, yeah, capito. Okay, and so that took care of that. They've said, oh, we got an Italian again. So I cheered with my Latin American friends. By then, of course, I was already living here, visiting my mom, who was here since 1998, and very proud that a Latino finally was a pope. He was the first pope in the Western Hemisphere, the first Latin American, and the first Jesuit. Francis promptly broke a 100-year tradition to not live in the grand papal apartment of the Vatican Apostolic Palace in favor of a modest 2-room residence. He also eats in the communal Vatican dining room. Pope Benedict lives in a much larger home, always inside the Vatican. Pope Francis has been a very loved and outspoken pope, although, as you've noticed, the Vatican is always in the background and has contradicted him on several occasions. My UN friends and I love that he's passionate about helping refugees and immigrants as one himself. In 2015, he was the first pope ever to address a US Congress. He told a joint meeting, "We, the people of this continent, are not fearful of foreigners, because most of us were once foreigners." He also advocates for the end to hunger and poverty, and is a very pro-environment. He's very concerned about the pro-environment, and he is also concerned about the impact of climate change. And 2 weeks ago, it was announced that he will trade in his current Toyota Popemobile for an American Frisker that will run entirely on battery power. He also likes bikers. In 2013, Pope Francis blessed thousands of Harley Davidson motorcycles and riders visiting the Vatican for the bike's 110th anniversary. I lived in Milwaukee. I got to talk about Harley. Harley Davidson gave him a leather jacket and 2 bikes, which were auctioned off for charity. So as you now know, recently there's been a lot of news. I thought, just in time for my talk, this is great. So on May 24th, the BBC ran a story on Germany's quiet Catholic rebellion on gay blessings and women preachers. This is in reaction to the Vatican's stern pronouncement in March that called same-sex unions sinful and reiterated a ban on priests giving blessings to same-sex unions. On May 29th, Pope Francis signed off on a rewrite of the Universal Catholic Church's internal penal system, updating a version from the 1980s. There will now be clearer penalties for the sexual abuse of minors, partially in response to the Church's raft of abuse scandals. It also refers to adults who have been abused. On June 4th, a CNN headline read, "Top German Catholic Church official offers resignation over the catastrophe of sexual abuse," saying he shared responsibility for this with church officials. Pope Francis has not yet accepted his resignation, and the Archbishop has been told to remain in the post until a decision is made. Now, there's all kinds of questions I imagine you will be giving me. So I thought I'd open it up to this at this point and tell a couple of Pope jokes if we still have time afterwards. So I welcome questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Ilona. It was excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
I got excited there, didn't it? The way we're working with questions, if anyone has a question, please raise your hands. We don't have the handheld microphone. It's just a bit too risky passing it around. So you'll whisper in my ear, or even if you shout it out, I'll still repeat it for the people at the back. Any question you have, and then Ilona will respond. So any questions we have?
Yes.
Is the Sistine Chapel part of the Vatican complex itself, or is that separate?
The Vatican Museum.
The question, can I just,
okay.
I have
yes.
to repeat the question for people
right.
who here. So is the Sistine Chapel part of the Vatican complex, or is it separate?
Okay, the Vatican museums are plural. There are several museums in there. Most people only are familiar with the Sistine Chapel. But yes, they are within the complex. And that's what constitutes the Vatican. You'll see St. Peter's is on one end with no wall, and then the wall, retaining wall in the back, encloses the gardens, the museums, and the library. It's one of the most important, I think, experiences to visit the Vatican museums. As I say this plural. There's also the catacombs in Rome, which are the beginning of Christianity, and they're not found anywhere else. But yes, that's where and at the moment, or during the last year with COVID, you could actually stand there and see it, because you're normally so packed in there that it was impossible for anybody to even crane their neck upward. Other questions?
I've got one here while I go over there. What happened to the famous red shoes? Was it the Prada?
Oh, they're not Prada. That's the point. But everyone, you may think that if you'd like, but no, they are made by his own shoemaker. Did I get through this all too fast? My goodness gracious, there's so much more to talk about. Yeah. The details, of course, yes.
So the question is, what changes were made in the East European countries with the Pope's influence?
Oh, well, definitely the impact starting in 1979 with his visit to Poland, when he was told not to by Brezhnev. It started the revolution there with Lech Walesa and the Solidarity movement, which then moved on, and I have almost the impression, I can't remember what I've said, whether I missed a page or not, but the countries that all fell following that included, of course, Hungary and Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Germany, East Germany itself, with the Berlin Wall coming down on November 9th. The most amazing thing to me of having lived through all of this and having visited and becoming such a part of this movement, which when you talk about one returning to your roots, this was a terribly important part of my life. I became Hungarian as well. I have dual nationality. I'm part of the European Union. And I have residencies in Rome as a Hungarian. And you're really left with what was the role of the Catholic Church? Well, it was a voice for them to actually have someone who stood for their rights in the Eastern European countries, who insisted that there had to be religious freedom, and also in the case of theirs, to return them to their former nationalities. My colleagues who had been Yugoslavian became Croatian again, the Slovenian, the Armenians, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, Estonians, all regained their former nationalities. And it was just a major change in our UN quota, of course. In fact, my Croatian colleague was very upset because he said, I used to have a high ranking. Now Croatia pays this much money, so I only get to have one part of me be part of the UN quota. So, but this also changed a lot in terms of how everyone, interchanged with each other. The fact that they could then go in and kind of clear up some of the messes that had happened under the State Farm-owned approach that the Soviet Union had had. The lands and the forests went back, personal properties went back to everyone. I even could have made a claim for my grandfather and great-grandfather's shop in the downtown Budapest, in fact, on the equivalent of Váci utca. It was the office of the Malev, the Hungarian Airlines. But, I would have had to have shown that I had been a resident of Hungary to do that. But it was a remarkable experience to see the changes that came after that and the pride that everyone had. And of course, this is actually something that I've talked about with Carl when he's spoken about the European Union, the rise of nationalism again in Europe, which I'm not talking about at the moment. This is specific to Italy and the Vatican influence. Some other?
I have a question back here in the
Yes.
gazebo. Could you elaborate on the reasons why the Pope that resigned, why he resigned?
I somewhat intimated this by the fact that the tax issues were being raised. There were also some possibilities that his butler was going to publish, and in fact he did publish some inside exposés on what was happening in the Vatican. And without trying to become too controversial, I can just suggest that there's some interesting reading out there for those who want to know more details. Just the tax scandal enough was plenty. The Vatican Bank and the fact that that Italy wanted to tax it. We're talking about 4,500 institutes, Vatican schools, Vatican retreats, and other associated entities owned by the Vatican that Italy wanted to tax. And that all got so vastly squelched. It was like a kind of hammer that came down and said, nope, we're not going there. And it will be interesting if the reforms that Pope Francis is still proposing for banking in particular will come forth, because certainly that would be an amazing exchange of wealth if the Vatican gave up some of that, some of their own income to distribute it more equally throughout the world. Yes?
I'm curious, what is the degree of religiosity among Catholics, in terms of their observance and their feeling of affiliation to the Church, particularly in light of some of the scandals that obviously they've seen and experienced in their own country regarding the Church, and that kind of impact in the United States in terms of people feeling close
Right. Has
Ilona, you'll have to
everyone heard
repeat.
all of that? Yes.
No, no one heard it. So you're going to repeat
Okay.
it all, Ilona.
Yes, well, I'll summarize it quickly. This is what is the Catholicism level worldwide and also in Italy. Is a general format, because again, I don't want to get into anything that's particularly, it's going to be alarming to those of you who are devout Catholics here. But one of the problems the church saw back when it first elected John Paul was the fact that it was not global. It had just taken for granted that Catholics around the world were continuing to breed Catholics. And so when it realized that the various other movements, evangelical in particular, was taking over, especially in Latin America, of which, for example, in Guatemala, it's something, it's far higher, the number of evangelicals that are there than Catholics. In Africa as well, they realized that they better get into more international popes. And that's definitively the reason why foreign popes have been elected. I don't know whether this will continue the trend. It may be. They've been talking for a long time back in Rome about getting an African pope. There was a cardinal who was very, very popular that ran in both, shall we say, during the periods of time when they had both elections of Benedict and Francis. And we were curious if he was going to be elected, but in this case they thought Latin America was a more likely area for increasing recruitment. The other thing that Pope Benedict did was to lower the age for both for catechism, for confirmation, excuse me, and so that he thought that it would mean that more kids would then raise themselves and their kids as Catholics, whereas it had kind of eased up to about 17, 18 years old when you took your confirmation vows, and that's been dropped, I believe, down to about 11 years old. Again, as it was when we were all kids. So there's been some definite concerns about making sure, and the rationale behind the beatifications, which means the step before you become a saint, which is when you're canonized, just vastly increased under Pope John Paul. He knew that if he was going to make someone a saint in a country, that their saints would then become more important to them and there'd be more devout followers. I give the example of in 2005, I'm sorry, 2002, when Pope John Paul came here to Mexico and to Guatemala and made Juan Diego a saint, and in Guatemala, Padre Hermano, and Padre Pedro, excuse me. And throughout all of the visits that they've made, this has been a very important part of their continuing spread of Catholicism, with both, I think, giving many people who had followed individuals an opportunity to connect more with the church, and vice versa, the church could connect more with the countries.
Okay, we have a question
Yes.
here. Right, it's a two-part question. First of all, have you seen the movie The Two Popes?
Yes.
And is it an accurate portrayal of?
I think it does an excellent job with Pope Francis. I think Benedict gets a little cleaner slate there than perhaps if you get to know more what was happening during that period. But I think it's a pretty good coverage. There's a lot of programs that have been done recently. There's 2 versions of the popes that have been run on Netflix. And I've been pleased to see some of my colleagues, one in particular who played the Pope's doctor, is a British colleague of mine who has starred in it. And there's been a number of books that have come out. I think it's interesting because I think up until basically John Paul internationalized the understanding of a pope that would be able to understand other than Italian politics. I think it was, it was really a very closed enclave, actually, prior to John Paul.
The second question was the ordination of women. Has Pope Francis made any comment or movement towards the ordination of women?
Well, without offending anybody, I'm afraid I can't say that any of the Catholic popes have been particularly keen on full recognition of the nuns and women. I know that when Pope John Paul visited the U.S., the nuns wished to speak with him, and he kind of took his time. And there has not been enough, I think, of this. Not that the Anglican Church has been any better, but that's related, but not the same, because there's in the Anglican in the UK and the Episcopalian in the US do differ on this topic in particular.
The question here is regarding the wealth of the Catholic Church and the Vatican, and with the poverty in the world, how does the Vatican reconcile the difference between the riches in the Vatican and the poverty in the rest of the world?
Well, I think all of you probably know that or feel you have your own answer to that. It's clear that they make a lot of money, and the value is something between 10 and 15 billion dollars of the value of the church holdings. I'm really, I think we all have to sort of reconcile ourselves as to what that means. My own personal reaction, the first time I went into the treasury at the Vatican, was shock. I had never seen so much wealth in gifts that had been given, the gold and the rubies and all of the gems. Gives you an understanding of, over the centuries, what the church has done. Now, one thing in its favor, let me put this carefully, is that the church has also been very, very careful to help countries maintain their cultural heritage and their wealth heritage. If it hadn't been for the church, we wouldn't have the artists and the history that we have in terms of architecture and art in Europe in particular. But then you also think of these extremely wealthy churches and what was the distribution to the poor. That's a topic I think all of you kind of need to explore yourselves. The information is out there in some of the most recent books.
Question is, after the red slippers, the famous red slippers were retired, is it true that the new Pope had a pair made in Leon, in Guanajuato, in Mexico?
Actually, I don't know that specific, but you're referring to Francis, not to
I
Benedict.
Oh, Benedict.
Benedict has now.
In Mexico, then he went to Leon.
Oh, come on.
It's
a Mexican claim that he went to Leon to get a new pair of
I imagine
slippers.
they probably gave him a pair as a gift. Yeah. I think that the Pope must, they received incredible gifts. But in the case of this, I know specifically that that they have their own dressers, and they go back centuries. In this in particular is reference to the shop that I mentioned from 1798, who are the trailers for the Vatican.
Okay,
Six generations.
The second part was, right, let me get this straight. Was it a mad Hungarian that defaced the Pietà?
I remember as I visited Italy the first time when I was only 17 in 1969, before that happened, and the fact that you could just go up and touch it. And now, of course, it's behind glass. Yes, you know what happened when they restored it? In the museum, the Vatican museums, there was a copy that had been done, and they were able to restore the original based on the copy. But yes, this happened I think he was not specifically from Hungary, but he was from one of the Eastern European. I can't immediately remember that, but yeah. There have been a couple of occasions of this where some of the artwork has been defaced, and luckily they had copies in the Vatican Museum that they were able to use to restore the originals. Yes?
Very interesting question from this gentleman. Have you ever met the Pope or a Pope? And if so, can you relate any personal experience?
Well, the audiences are welcome for everyone, and it is something that I've had many visitors do. In our UN agency, this was always, for our annual meeting every year, was a major part of their visit, that they would go. And it's sort of, you realize the global impact of the church when you have people who are visiting you, and the very first thing they ask you is, how can I get an audience? How can I go to an audience? In the early days, before 9/11, basically, there were opportunities that you could sit very, very close to the Pope, and they were private audiences held by our UN agency with the Pope. These were for our diplomats and their families. The closest I got was to this front row when in 1985, when Pope John Paul walked right by, and I was sitting there as part of the delegation, and that was a very special occasion. But yes, it's possible to go and see the Pope. Of course, he comes out and speaks every Sunday when he's in Rome from the balcony at St. Peter's.
We have a slightly different question here regarding the FAO, which you used to work for.
Yes.
And how active is it in Mexico, or is it active in Mexico?
We don't have not as, the Latin American office we have is in Santiago, Chile. So we don't have and we have a sub-regional office in Panama, but we don't have one in Mexico. However, there is an FAO office, but it's not. I think it's just basically projects that are going on. There's been, if you're interested in that real quickly, there's been an emphasis on land administration of trying to, what we call territorial development, where you want to be sure that the wealth of land ownings is equally distributed. Yes, Carl. Oh,
Carl wants to use the microphone, so he's gonna have the last question, so no one has to.
Oh my gosh, I don't want Carl to be the last, he should be the
So
first.
just hang on a second. We have one more question, and then it's you.
One more question before you go.
So, what is the response what is the status? In response to the Pope, the Mexican president requested that the Vatican apologize for destroying the Mexican culture.
I have not heard that one specifically. The Pope, various popes, all three recent ones, have made several apologies. And this has been an extremely important part of the church trying to get to more reality level type of thinking and communication with its countries. That one I specifically don't know. I'd be happy to talk to you or hear about. Can you tell me more about it?
It's the influence, the religious influence on the Indians. Christianity influence that destroyed all the Indian beliefs.
So the question was about the influence on the indigenous people here.
Yeah, well, obviously, everybody knows colonialism has had extreme negative as well as what would be considered some positive impacts in the world over history time. That specifically I don't know of. Maybe I'm just following more the European, but I'd like to know more about that. I'd be very interested to hear what you think. The colonialization and the church, one of the reasons that all these saints and such exist is so that it would allow natives of each of these countries, Juan Diego and others, to be given the status within the church, recognizing their indigenous roots. And I think everybody understands that part very well. The Latin, the change from Latin to native languages is also really important because there's a long history of the church maintaining a rather secret means of communication by restricting the number of individuals who knew Latin. But we all know that, I think. That's not really news specifically. But yeah, no, I'd like to know more about that. I'm afraid I can't answer it more specifically.
Any more questions before we allow the coal to contaminate the microphone? No? Okay. Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me this way? Yes. Would you agree with me, Ilona, that Pope Benedict was really a reluctant pope? He really didn't want to be a pope. I say that because he was my theology professor in the university, and and he was an academic. He wanted to study, he wanted to write, he was quite dogmatic, and he couldn't handle all the scandals that were coming out. So that, in my opinion, he retired for that reason. I'm not sure if you agree with that. While he was very dogmatic, Pope Francis now has said what the church needs is less dogma and more love.
Thank you, Cole. You smell very nice, brother.
I would definitely agree. There's sort of a bit of gossip about why Ratzinger was elected. He had been very influential in helping John Paul through his last years when he had Parkinson's. He was a disciplinarian. And I think they thought that it would be a very smooth transition. And he was asked to be the Pope, but he always contended that he wanted to be just temporary. And so it was, I think, an opportunity for him to slip out the back door and go hang out in the back of the Vatican in 2013 when all of the push was at that time, because of the Eurozone crises, to try to tax the church. And there were lots of other things that were coming out at the time. And so it was easier for him to withdraw. So yes, I agree. He's also the oldest Pope still. He's 93 and still going strong. Francis has had a sciatica problem, so he's been not as active lately as he could be. I think of all three popes, Benedict is the one who lifted the most weights. Nice, strong man, and has been a backbone to the church, but quietly in the back when it was John Paul, and continues, I'm sure, to be quietly in the background for Pope Francis.
Well, once again, Ilona, thank you very much. Excellent job.